Hey guys, in this two-part episode, I am sitting down with my good friend Brandon Gray, an OG raver who's been involved in several aspects of the rave scene since the early 90s. In part one of this episode, we discuss how to balance your professional life and raving as you get older, the misconceptions that come along with this hobby, and how raving changes when you have kids and your friends start to move on. In part two, we chat about how Brandon got involved with the Lunchbox team, our thoughts on music festivals reopening, and how idolizing DJs can negatively impact this community. I know the stories in these two parts are going to be incredibly valuable, and I hope that a lot of you listening can relate to what we talk about. So with that being said, let's get into it. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Rave Culture Cast, your weekly guide to the EDM community, music festivals, and more. I am your host, Emma Capotis. What is up, fam? How are we all doing? Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than anything I've ever done on the podcast before because I am splitting it into two parts. So I just polled you guys on Facebook in our Facebook group community and on Instagram at raveculturecast, and I mentioned that today's episode in particular was almost 2 hours long, but I promise you guys, it is jam-packed full of just incredible stories and valuable information, and honestly, like, I'm so excited about the topics that Brandon and I get into today, but I think it does make the most sense to split this into two parts, so that's what I'm doing. So part one today is going to be about an hour, and then part two is about probably like 50 minutes around there. And so I'm going to release part two 2 days from now. So by the time you're listening, I believe it's Friday, February 26th, I believe, is when part two will come out. So you guys can, listen at your leisure whenever you want, pause the episode, come back to it. But I just think that made the most sense. So I hope you guys are super excited about what we are going to be diving into today. I want to do a quick little introduction into the topics we're talking about, and then I will jump into our affirmation of the week, and then we're gonna get started because we're in here for the long haul. All right, guys, buckle up, grab a snack. Okay, so I have heard your requests. I get a lot asking me, hey Emma, can you have a raver on who's not in their 20s? Can you have a raver on who's been, OG, like somebody that's been doing this since the 90s? And I hear you loud and clear, and I wanna make sure that I have all different types of people with different personalities and backgrounds and all that stuff. I've said that before. So my good friend Brandon Gray is my guest today, you guys. He and I connected actually through the Lunchbox team. So some of you might know I work with Lunchbox Hydration Pack. Love the team over there, and that's how Brandon and I met. He's been involved with them pretty early on in the company, actually. So yeah, we connected. We met only once in person, I'm pretty sure, at EDC Orlando 2019, and he's amazing. I consider him a good friend and a mentor and somebody I can go to for advice. And I was like, Brandon, can we talk about it? Can we just talk about how raving changes as you get older? Can we talk about what it's like once you add kids into the situation and how you balance, attending festivals and things like that? Because him and his wife attend festivals together. And then, just to be transparent with you guys, like, this is something that's on my mind a lot. Like, I just turned 30, which is crazy, but I think about that all the time. I have had friends who have lost interest and moved on, and like they're not really raving or going to music festivals anymore. And then I still have friends who are interested. And then I have some friends who I've met, through the community who are younger, and now they're part of my rave fam as well. But it's something I think about because I do think not that I give a flying fuck, and that's what we're gonna talk about today, but I think there are people out there who are like, aren't you growing out of it? Like, how long are you gonna do this? Like, isn't that something like college kids do? Like, you're really still doing that? And I could not think that that's further from the truth. But it's definitely something that I think about, especially when I want to have kids. Like, I'm sure I'm going to have to take a break at some point, and life will feel different and priorities will feel different. And I hope that people listening today, if you're in a similar situation, you can relate to this because this episode is for you guys. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. And then, like I mentioned in the beginning, in the part two, we kind of switch it up. We talk a lot more about like how the experience also changes when you get older. Like, you're more going to these events just for the experience. You're not like rushing from stage to stage trying to catch every mainstream act. It's just like, it's a different experience. And then we also just talk a lot about, COVID and how we think that's going to affect music festivals reopening. Brandon, his wife is in the medical field, and then he just got his second vaccine, but he has underlying health issues that we talk about. And so we're going to chat about how it feels, for somebody like him, and, how we think shows will come back and when we think it's going to be safe. And then lastly, we talk a little bit about DJ culture and kind of about like idolizing DJs and how that can sometimes not be a good thing for the community. Like, it's better to just kind of humanize everyone. So wow, this was a very long intro, but like I said, we covered so much. So I hope you guys stick around for both episodes. If you are enjoying the content, you guys, you already know the drill. I would love it if you could rate, review, subscribe over on our YouTube channel. And like I mentioned, if you guys want, to get in on the inside action, if you want to participate in different polls and questionnaires and, have your opinion heard, definitely join our Facebook group community. We are going to be doing a Zoom call, I think on Monday, March 1st. There's a poll in the Facebook group, but I'm pretty sure it was Monday, March 1st. So if you guys want to be part of our next family Zoom call, join the Facebook group. That's how you will get access to the Zoom link. And I can't wait to see you guys and chat with you. I love doing these. So anyway, with all that being said, the affirmation of the week that I thought would be very fitting for this episode, because I really wanted to pick something about kind of being like confident in your skin and accepting yourself and not really like worrying about what other people have to think about you or your decisions. So the affirmation for this episode is, I release all doubts and insecurities about myself. I release all doubts and insecurities about myself. Say it out loud, write it down, whatever feels good for you, but I can't stress that enough. Again, you should just feel comfortable in your skin and you should do what makes you happy, and it doesn't matter how old you are or if you have kids or whatnot. Don't worry about that. Release all the doubts and insecurities and just do what feels good to you. So with all of that being said, I'm going to roll right into the part 1 of the interview with Brandon here. I really hope you guys enjoy it. So please join me in welcoming Brandon Gray to the podcast.
First off, Brandon and I obviously know each other. We have a relationship. He's not only a friend, but a mentor and somebody that I go to for advice and support. And I very much appreciate, how we were connected in our relationship now. So, I know some things, but I don't know all things. So I'm selfishly having you on here so that I can learn your whole history with raving. But I know you have a lot of stories to tell. I know you have a lot of interesting perspectives on things. So I think people will get a lot out of this episode. So with that being said, welcome to the podcast, Brandon.
Thank you, Emma. I have been a fan longer than you know. Even before we worked together or knew each other, I was a fan of your videos and everything that you've done, and somebody that I admire in the scene who's doing things right. So
thank you. I appreciate that. And I love the shirt, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
For anybody watching on YouTube. Very, very fitting. Okay. So let's just start from the beginning. So obviously let's do a quick little introduction. Can you tell the audience who you are, where you're from, what you do currently?
I am Brandon Gray. What do I do? Jack of all trade, master of none. I work as partially as the director of operations for Lunchbox hydration packs. I also run my own firm in the professional world doing my main day job. And I have several side projects within the EDM community, either in the realms of like harm reduction for drugs and medical issues within the EDM community, all the way to paramedic response type stuff and some of the health and safety stuff that we've done with Lunchbox. So,
yep.
I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, I'm originally from Denver and then all over. I've lived in Texas. I've lived in the Caribbean. I've lived in New York. I've lived, but I've been in Atlanta for 20 years now. Yeah, 20 years now.
Wow. Okay.
We're going on 19 years now. So
nice. Yeah. I was going to say, I learned about St. Martin. You lived there for a while.
I did. And I'm going to take you, we're going to go down one of these times.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, XXM Festival, I mean, again, like if anything this year has kind of given me a perspective on the events that I want to attend, and I'm very much into like the transformational and like international festivals now, of course, that we aren't able to travel, but SXM you were telling me about, and now I've done like all this research on it and I'm like, how did I never know about this? Why have I never gone? Did you ever attend? Have you been?
Yeah, no, I've never been to X6M in its current iteration. It's about, well, this would have been, I guess, their 6th year, if I remember. Now, I know all the kind of beaches and the people who have kind of set it up and what they've done there, but no, it's a house and mainly house and techno, kind of festival that takes place over the entire island, both on the French and Dutch side. Lots of villa parties, stuff of that nature. So yeah, a lot of the international stuff I've done. Bill Blanc, the White Party up in Montreal before. That's been going on since my early raver days. And that's not too far from you. That's something that
that's not bad.
I used to do back in the day. That's a great. But most of those events are, kind of smaller scale. They're house, they're techno. You don't find bass music is U.S. mainly, so you don't see a lot of that in those outsides. But there's some really cool. Not too far festivals that aren't, traveling to Europe or Amsterdam or stuff of that nature.
When this is all over, it's done for them.
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, it's hard because you think in 2019, I think I did 11 festivals.
Wow. Okay.
In 2019. And so to go from 2019 and then having a 2020 schedule built out that was going to be close to the same to absolutely nothing. It's what we all say. It's like I'm looking at it now going, I've been in quarantine for 11 months. I'm like, it's that SpongeBob meme right now. That's like, 11 months later. So.
Yeah. Well, take us on a journey. I mean, I want to hear, let's go back to the beginning. How long have you been raving? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the first shows you remember going to?
Yeah, I mean, again, back in the day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the rave. One of those titles. No, I guess I started raving in about 1993. Freshman, sophomore in high school, kind of that era, and it's kind of how you hear about it. It was dirty. It was grimy. It was, we were kind of talking slightly before. It's, what people call raves now, and it makes most of us, and I talk to some of us old timers that we hear, oh, I'm going to a rave, and they mean I'm going to the club, or I'm going to EDC Las Vegas, and that's the rave. Raves back then were literally illegal warehouse parties, or sometimes in the middle of the woods, sometimes wherever, that you either had to be on somebody's list to know. We didn't have cell phones, and a lot of it was pager or just you had to know somebody, and you'd get a flyer and it would have a telephone number and it would tell you where to go. You're going to meet at this parking lot or whatnot. You drive to that parking lot and you hope that somebody's going to be there. If you made it on time, great. If not, no. And you would pay your $10 or whatever, and here'd be a van or a bus or whatever that comes, picks you off and takes you somewhere else. And it wasn't like you got this address of this warehouse to go to, because all of it, especially through the early 90s and into the 2000s, was highly illegal. Like, we started having the Rave Act, and we started, the war on drugs was pretty prominent. And just by being in that warehouse, if it got broken up, you were brought up on drug charges, even if you were not on drugs, or they, and still some of this happens. Like, you see some of the news articles out of the UK, and they're still having these types of underground raves because of what their government is kind of doing. Here, I think a lot of that culture's draw has changed. I still see it a little bit in some major cities with some after party type stuff.
Right.
Where you have your main clubs that your echo stages and everything else, and then once they shut down at like 2-3 in the morning, Avant-Garde, I think, does about the same. Then you might hear about, all right, there's a party going on here at this place, and it's, again, some local DJ. We never really knew who the DJs were,
Right.
or
Didn't
most
matter.
of the time. Yeah, it didn't matter. That's not what you were going for. And then again, DJs didn't have the same following that they do now. Like it's funny because I hear Cascade stories out of the same time back before he was Cascade.
Yeah.
When I first started hearing about him in the late 90s, and he was just a local DJ in 97, 98 that would show up and hope at one of these parties he would get some deck space and spin, or that they would kind of launch it, and you would learn about them, but they either had regional following or no following at all.
That was it. And what city were you in at this point?
I was in San Antonio at this point in time.
Okay.
So we did rave parties all the way from San Antonio to Austin, a lot up in Dallas. Dallas had one that I don't know if it's still going on. I know they tried to bring it back at one time. It was called Under Groundhog Day. And it happened every year on Groundhog Day.
That's awesome.
And literally it would draw people from a couple hundred miles that it got to be such a big event.
Right.
And they would hold it literally in the middle of the woods someplace. And again, you had no idea where you were going, and like we talked, I can't imagine now sending my 18-year-old child out into the world and being like, okay, show up at this parking lot and hop on this bus without a cell phone and let them take you someplace and drop you off somewhere and everything's going to be okay.
Right.
Like now as an adult, I'm like, stranger danger. You don't do that. But yeah, we kind of did back then. So yeah, and at the same point in time, my wife has similar stories. She was, raving at the same point in time in San Francisco and doing the California scene. And it was very much kind of the same thing across the country.
I didn't know she was also I know she goes to them with you now, but I didn't know she had a whole history with it too.
Oh yeah, she was straight up Candy Kid. I mean, one of the original Plur Candy Kids.
Actually, now you say that, I think I might have seen a photo on Facebook, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe I don't know that we have any photos. God, I think we probably destroyed everything from those days, just so there wouldn't be any proof. But yeah, she was straight furry boots.
That's awesome.
And we're talking. And again, those are some of the things that have kind of changed. Plur culture,
right.
We were coming up through that age. Now I'm 4 years older than her, so her time would have been slightly a little bit different skewed from mine. But Plur culture was totally different back then, and not that the same undercurrents weren't there, but it was really applied very differently. I had a conversation in 2019. I was at EDC and I hang out with some of the group known as the OGs that are kind of the early Insomniac, people, and a lot on the West Coast would kind of know who they are. And we had this discussion about how Plur has changed and sometimes been misapplied, but sometimes just applied differently. Because back then it applied to us as a sub community, but we never brought that into the bigger world. It didn't apply to you if you were outside the scene. And part of the reason is it was a way to protect us inside the scene, because again, you were persecuted. You
for being a part of it,
for being a part of it, and still to some extent maybe, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later about what it's like having a professional job and everything else, and yet leading a rave life. But so I think there's still undercurrents of, oh, that's what you do in your free time type stuff. That happened to us in older communities or sub communities that don't necessarily happen when you're hanging out with your 20 some odd year old friends, and you're 20 years old. So, there's still some of that stereotypical, stuff that happens, but not to the degree of what it used to be.
Right. No, it's interesting too that you were in Texas because when you were talking about like illegal warehouses, I'm automatically picturing like New York and California, but were you going with a big group? Like, did you have a whole friend group that was all into the same type of music and everything? Yeah.
Up until the late 90s, it was in Texas. And then for a little bit of a stint where I was in grad school and everything else, it was Chicago, Detroit, and all of kind of southern Michigan that I kind of raved in. And then did a slight stint in New York City at Columbia and did that whole, New York City kind of rave scene, and then came to Atlanta and we had the Atlanta rave scene. So, kind of working that angle. In the younger days, probably like it is now. I don't know. I've probably lost a lot of memories from high school. I'm always shocked at the people who can remember people's names and everything else. And I'm like, I barely remember where I was, but I blame part of that on raves. But yeah, I mean, we probably had a good group of 20 people that were in our immediate circle, and kind of the way that is now. You have your immediate rave family, and then you had kind of your extended rave family, and then you had people that you just knew were in the scene, and that really hadn't changed. It was definitely bigger in Texas, and the rave scene itself was, I think, bigger in Texas than it was anywhere else at that time that I had experienced. I knew the rave scene in California was huge, but even the rave scene in New York City wasn't that big.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Things were standardized more, I think, more standardized shows.
Or clubs or anything.
You had Pasha back then.
Right.
And you had, I'm trying to think what else you had in New York in the late 90s, early 2000s, but they were doing stuff at the Roseland Ballroom in Times Square. I remember seeing Paul Van Dyke there, and everything else in the early 2000s. And so again, it depends on what you classify as a rave, because not all music events for us back then, like I saw Daft Punk in 1997, and that wasn't a rave, it was a concert show. Type thing. So for us to kind of to feel like it was a rave, it was that underground kind of feeling. And there definitely were some of those things in New York City, in Brooklyn, or, Queens or Kings or whatnot going through there. But I think because in that region, you had more acts coming in, kind of like Miami at that point in time. While Ultra didn't start until 98, if memory serves me correctly, even before then, you still had Western Music Conference, and you kind of had that whole week, which turned into Miami Music Week. And so there wasn't a lot of underground partying because there were clubs galore and musical artists coming in that were bigger there. So it wasn't necessarily that big of a quote unquote rave scene.
Got it. And then moving into the 2000s, how did that change for you? Were you always going to shows consistently, or did you ever take any breaks, or did it change at all?
So I did start, there is a period of time during the past 25 years, however long it is now, that we did, for professional reasons, take a break of managing stuff, about a 10-year break. But up until that break, which started in 2007, it was pretty regular.
Nice.
It was club shows, it was festivals, it was, I guess I started going to Ultra in 2001, I think was my first Ultra.
I was going to ask where festivals started coming into play.
I mean, so, and again, festivals were kind of totally different back then too. So you didn't have the plethora of kind of what you have now, but, it was pretty consistent for me until 2007. And then we kind of, which we can get into later with professional stuff, we just kind of broke from that, just the scene in general, to kind of concentrate on family and professional lives, and then realized that we missed it too much and came back.
Well, how did you and Jen meet?
I think I just did one of these things for Valentine's Day about how we met. We were best friends before we were anything else. She moved upstairs from me in an apartment that I lived in, with her then husband and son, and we became best friends for years. And then she she got divorced or separated, and I had a house, and we were best friends. So I said, hey, how about you move in? And we were very platonic for the longest period of time, and then finally realized that why are we platonic anymore? So
That's awesome.
We started. People ask when we started dating. I have no idea. We
Yeah.
never had like a first date.
It was gradual.
It was kind of one of those things that we just realized that we're in a relationship now. And it took us about 12 years of that to get married. And so we finally got married a couple of years ago, and yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, now we're a big happy family, and our son, my stepson, is 18 now, and we're done with that.
Yeah.
I'm buying him festival tickets now to come on, and having shirts made that say Rave Mom and Rave Dad and Rave Son.
That's awesome. Did you guys go? When did you and Jen first go to a show together?
So Jen's first festival was not until 2006, and it was one of the last shows we ever did. It was Bang Music Festival in Miami.
Okay.
In November 2006, and it had Gnarls Barkley, Duran, Tiesto, who played one of the worst sets I've ever heard Tiesto play. I'll never forgive him for that set. Daft Punk. It was the start of Daft Punk's Alive 07.
Wow.
Can't remember who else was there. Jen still has a t-shirt, believe it or not, this many years later.
That's
and it was down in Miami, and it was one of those last minute kind of, we knew somebody in the industry that had tickets, and he's like, hey, we're going to go down. You should go down. And we're like, we can't go down just for a day. And we just decided on a whim, all right, we're going to go down for a day. And it was probably one of the best experiences we've down there at used to be the old Bicentennial Park. They tore it down now, but right next to Bayfront Park in Miami. And
that's awesome.
Little did any of us know, it's probably one of the second best shows I've ever seen, Daft Punk Alive 07, and I talk about it often. Cool. And I'm glad that we did. But that was her first festival. Like she had never done. She had always done, a club show here and there, rave stuff when she was younger. But yeah, she had never done like and if I remember,
like
it was only, if I remember correctly, it was only one day. So it wasn't even like an ultra now, a 3-day event, or even a 2-day of a Shaky Beats or something of that nature. Wow. So
were you living in Atlanta at that point?
Yeah.
You were.
At that point in time, yeah, we were all we've always lived in Atlanta now.
Cool.
Since Jen and I've been together. So yeah.
That's awesome.
So that was her first. Again, I think my first big one was Ultra. I'd done some smaller stuff. I'd done, believe it or not, some country music stuff way back in the day. Living in Texas and kind of growing up there for a little bit. One of my best friends in high school was George Strait's son. So you can't get away from the.
That's really funny.
Yeah, you can't get away from the Texas country music, that type of root system. But yeah, I think first big EDM one would have been Ultra. 2001.
How were the vibes there? Like, was the rave culture, like plur side of things, present at a festival, or was it a totally different environment?
I think Ultra's always been that different environment.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense. For any of us that have ever been to Ultra,
you don't
Ultra's
get that vibe.
No,
you don't.
You don't. You get the Poppy Chulo vibe. Yeah, like it's and instead of Molly and hugs, it's cocaine and Cubans. It's just it's a different. I mean, it's special in what it is for a lot of that, but it's not. And there's definitely elements of there. I mean, I've met some really great friends at Ultra that we've kind of palled around and done other events with, but it's kind of a very Ultra just in general. Now, back then, again, you had Western Music Conference or Winter Music Conference, not Western, WMC, and then that whole week we would do Nikki Beach, and we would do, all these different things that turned into Miami Music Week. It wasn't owned by Ultra back then. And that's where I think the main reason we went down. So we would go down for, unlike now that I think a lot of people, and there's still a Miami Music Week that happens all week long. I think it was a little bit different back then. Your main shows and stuff were that week, and Ultra was a tag on the back end.
Right.
And for a while, WMC did their own stuff and Ultra did their own stuff, and they were two separate companies. And Ultra, at some point in time, somewhere in 2013, 2013 is the year that they had two Ultras, 2 weekends of Ultra. I mean, they were kind of at odds with one another, and at some point in time, Ultra just bought WMC and made it all into one. But so you would kind of go down for the entire 7 or 10 days, and it was definitely a different party vibe then. It was like 7 days of science on how when you sleep, when you don't sleep, which how much caffeine pills are you taking to stay awake here? What sleeping pills are you taking away to get your 4-hour nap there? In very Miami fashion. I mean, everybody was kind of, but the vibes were, and the vibes are even different from that, kind of now. I mean,
yeah, it is.
Rip Ultra, because I mean, God only knows if
what's going on.
What's going on now with them. But even the last couple of years of Ultra were a little bit different from that. You saw rough. More floor culture. It just depends on where you. I mean, again, it's hard for the East Coasters that don't get to experience the West Coast festivals of what like a Pasquale and Insomniac and everything kind of put on, or the Northeasters that only get, kind of, Moonrise and some of the other stuff to really understand. There's differences around the country depending on the promoters that are putting that on and the culture that they kind of bring.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. I mean, it's super interesting. I kind of like want to do a video at some point, spoiler alert, on like the evolution of Ultra just in general. But if anything, this past year has made me be like, and I don't regret it. I do not regret doing my favorite events multiple times, but it's just made me think like, I just want to do different ones and I want to do them once and then just try something else, because you've experienced some of the other ones. And I feel like embarrassed, maybe not embarrassed, but I feel ashamed that I haven't done a Californian like festival or rave yet. There's some in Canada I want to do, like internationally that I want to do. And I just feel like the experience and environment is going to be different at all of them. So moving forward, it will change, and it's going to be a different experience going into my 30s, which brings me to my next topic. But Brandon and I were talking a little bit about how it changes for you, like as, one, the scene has changed, but two, how it changes as you have a professional career, as you have kids. And I get requests all the time on this podcast to have people on who have been raving for a longer time and aren't in their 20s, because people want to know, how do you balance things? How does it change? And they want to hear, different interesting stories. So can you talk a little bit about the evolution to maybe that period when you said you kind of took a break and you had to focus on your career?
Yeah. I miss my 20s. I would like to go back to my 20s with what I know now and just set myself up differently.
Yes.
If that was ever a possibility. And again, that's what old people kind of say when they get to, if I would have known then what I know now.
In hindsight.
In hindsight. And then I look back at all the advice that I used to get and I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, damn, if I would have listened. A lot changes. I mean, not just only the change of the scene, which we talked about, but your outlook and your change on things, your priorities, your huge friend circle that you had in your 20s that would go to all these events starts dwindling as they get into their 30s. And when they're in their 40s, they're like, what the hell are you still doing? And it was, so, we took a break in 2006, 2007. Like I said, that Bang event was probably one of our last ones. And it was until 2017 when we didn't really come back into the scene.
Wow.
And, we still stayed close to the music, to some extent. I mean, I probably got a little bit more into mainstream music than I was before, or now that I am after. I couldn't tell you what the latest song on the top 40. I don't. My wife comes home talking about the Lizzo song that's out at some point in time, or Cardi B, and I'm like, who? What do you like? I don't listen to that stuff any longer. When we were on break, I probably would have, but so the reason we kind of started taking or took that long a break is I started working a professional career that it got to a point in time where I didn't know how to, balance rave life or club life or whatnot with professional life. And, looking back at it, I probably could have navigated the two. Now, the problem is I still, to some extent, work in the federal government system. The federal court system. Back then I worked in federal law enforcement type stuff. And so, which was its own kind of, I would never work like drug crime or the Rave Act and what came out of the Rave Act never prosecuted anybody, but I kind of always had this firm like in my mind, I'm not going to work that stuff. And luckily that's not my area of expertise. Mine's financial crime and stuff of that nature. But it became two things. Like, how do you let people know that, hey, yeah, I'm doing an undercover case with the FBI, but yet I'm at this rave with you. Like those two things just don't mesh. And it was something I was really self-conscious about and just didn't want to and B, on both sides of it. Like, what happened to my professional career if I was at an underground event that got busted?
Right.
How do you now take everything that you've worked so hard for and potentially toss it out the window and be like, because again, the federal government isn't too kind about that. And for Jen, who's in healthcare, cardiology and that type stuff, like, we're even through those times, we're just very careful about, how is what you're portrayed, and the two shouldn't reflect on one another, but how is what you do in your free time looked upon in your professional career field. And over the past couple years, we've really laxed up on that a little bit. Like I remember, some of my wife's coworkers know that we go to music festivals. Those are our vacations. So I do a lot through Lunchbox, more than she does, but even I'm looking at our poster because I do lineup posters every year of everything that we did. And
that's awesome.
2, 3, she did 7 with me in 2019. So 7 events, and her coworkers, again, kind of know we have unwritten rules with our Rave family that you don't post pictures on social media. Some of the people that even back in the day raved with them, still in contact with, they've gone on to be senior accountant for Colgate-Palmolive. One of them went on to be an accountant for FDIC, the banking regulatory agency. One of them is a senior executive at Coca-Cola. So, and at different phases. So it doesn't mean that people who are young and raving, the stereotype is you're wasting your life, you're not doing anything. A lot of people have gone on to do some great things. A lot of them either, still do it, just very discreetly, or you're just careful.
Right.
You have more to lose than you had when. And no offense to anybody who's in their 20s that's a waitress at Applebee's, and not to say that that's not, but losing that job and going over to Chili's is totally different than when you're in your 30s.
Yes.
Do you think about that when you're like, because you have your Ravecast, and I know what your side projects, but I also know there's what we would call real world job sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever worry that how people would look at you in your professional career?
Yeah, I think that's I was going to say to you, I think it's an interesting combination because you both had you still have like very serious careers, but also to your point, music festivals and raving, not that it's mainstream, but I feel like it's way more acceptable. And now with social media, it's like way more common that people talk about it more. So I'm sure it was like a combination of like, now it's a little bit more like, oh, people get it. They know what a music festival is. They understand like what you're going to do and things like that. But yeah, at my full-time job, I think it was a similar thing. Like I would typically say like, oh, I'm traveling for a music festival or something like that. I feel like I wasn't using the word raving as much. Yeah. But now, yeah, like my coworkers knew I was going to shows like all the time. And then my boss knew I was doing music festivals and things like that. And they were asking me, they're like, oh, when's your next event? Or like, how do you feel right now without events? So they know now, but I feel like it's not easier, but I feel like people just know what a music festival is now. And they like totally get that being a hobby. So yeah, no,
I think that Jen finds nurses that come up to her, like she was wearing an Anjuna badge reel one time for her badge. And one of the nurses came up and was like, that's Anjuna. And Jen's like, yeah. And they're like, what do you know about? And it's part of a conversation. Jen's like, well, we do EDC and we do this, that, and the other. They're like, that's so cool. Oh, I'm fixing to have Kitty, you can't come. You know, that brings up conversations of that we do EDC and Jen's still a little bit careful with that, but I think the culture that you're right has changed. Mm-hmm. Where again, it's slightly different in what I do for the federal court system because I would never use the term rave in any professional or even social media standpoint of it because of what that conjures up and because of how somebody unscrupulously could use that to mean drug or to mean party or just to mean contract,
like you're a huge partier. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we kind of do the same. We say we're traveling for music festivals. We usually don't say what music festival we're going to. Even in mixed company, now our younger friends and non-professional stuff or even professional stuff, people that we do know that know what we do. We'll use, EDC or we'll use, eForest or Ultra or whatnot. But yeah, it's just, it's a different, I think that's one of the things that has changed over the years that have been a hard mindset for me to kind of get out of.
Yeah.
And then coming back in 2017 was a shock.
What made you want to come back? Was there anything in particular?
My health started failing. I started getting, I had some bad diagnosis and outlooks on health stuff, and which was a really big shock in like 2015, 2016. And I just kind of had this epiphany of where was I happiest? Like I'd spent this time building a career and Jen had built her career and we had raised a family or we're in the process of raising a family. And I'm like, again, not to turn this morbid, but a doctor tells you, your chances of survival X amount of years out from different stuff. And you're in your 30s and you're like, that really sucks. So you sit there and you go, oh, well, if they're right and I only, have whatever left, then fuck it, I'm going to go have fun type thing. And we're like, well, what can we just start doing? So we did. One of the festivals I used to work for was known as Music Midtown. It was actually one of the largest in the country for a number of years when I worked for them in Atlanta. And they had shut down and come back up in under different ownerships at different time. And Bruno Mars was playing. And Jen was a huge fan of Bruno Mars. And so I was like, well, let's just go. I mean, it's a local festival. We'll get a hotel room down the city so we don't have to drive back and forth. But let's just do that. And I started getting really excited about that. And again, it wasn't, I think they had a small EDM stage, but nobody, was really there. And but I just started getting excited about the thought of it. And the week after was going to be Imagine. And I had had thought about going to Tomorrow World when it was in Georgia during but we never got tickets. Again, life and everything else, and just feeling like you were too old to do that. And I think that's what prevented those things as I was in my 30s.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the hard things that came back that I'll touch on. Here coming up of coming back into it was feeling old. And you see the questions of it on Reddit or even on I've seen them on your Facebook page. That is like, I'm 30 years old. Am I going to be the oldest person? And how do I do this? And da 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 da. And at that time, I was in again in my later 30s, and we went to Imagine, and it was clean and sober, and I don't drink, so I, no even alcohol involved, and it was still an amazing experience. It was that year. It was Deadmau, Tiesto, and Above and Beyond headlining.
Wow.
Imagine that year with a whole bunch of other shows, Oliver Heldens and just a great lineup that Imagine always has. And so, and again, I had known one of the things that's changed that we can touch on is the DJs and the relationships with DJs. So back in the early 2000s, I had met Above and Beyond. They had we had spent the day together, type thing. And to see how that scene had changed and to reconnect with their music live that many years later, really put the bug in the system there.
Yeah.
So, but it, to get to the burning question of that everybody always has about if you're too old.
I was just going to say, let's talk about this.
I mean, I take pills at every festival. I'm going to admit, they just happen to be Advil and a heart medication and a couple cholesterol medications now. I guess the difference is, and you get to a point in time when you look around at the crowd and you realize that literally a lot of the people there are young enough to be your child. And that's like, there's this cycle of emotions that happens where how can I... at first you're self-conscious about it and you're like, God, I'm the creepy old person in the corner. Like how are they going to look at me? And then you get to this realization that nobody cares.
Yep.
As long as you're not the creepy old person in the corner.
Yeah.
So don't be the creepy old person in the corner and you don't have a problem.
Yeah.
And so again, it's weird being one of the oldest people in the room, and people refer to you as Rave Mom and Rave Dad, and realize that you could be their mom and their dad. And, I'm fixing to have a child that's going to be my Rave son, who's my actual son, at these things and do that. But really in the end, you learn to take care of your body a little bit better. You learn that you can outlast. I mean, I can outlast a 21-year-old. It was funny. We did Home Base and EDC Orlando in 2018. We've done it for several years, but 2018 in particular for this story, where we're driving down with all of our Rave family, and they're all 21, 22, talking about how they're just going to party 24 hours a day, and this, that, and the other. And it's all gas, no brakes. We're going down for an entire way. And I remember turning to Jen night one, and they're all tucked in their beds at 1 o'clock in the morning, and somebody's spinning downstairs in the lobby, and we're still partying. I think Jen and I got like 7 hours of sleep that 4-day weekend.
So funny.
And we look at them and we're like, what the hell happened to all gas, no brakes? So again, I think for the older crowd that doesn't know whether they can do it or whatnot, again, you get on a pain regimen with Advil and everything else. You eat well, you learn to eat well and take care of your body, and you more than certainly can. And then from the social aspect of it, as long as you're not self-conscious, and I guess this is a good moniker for most things in life.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you open yourself up and you put out good things into the world,
Mm-hmm.
people will reciprocate off of that. And
Yeah, I
and
agree.
so you could be that person that clams down and sits at the back of the stage and back of the crowd and doesn't talk to anybody around you and just puts off these vibes of don't get near me. And come Sunday at the end of the festival, you're not going to have met anybody, and then you turn and go, well, nobody. I mean, it's a closed group. It's
it wasn't a good experience.
It wasn't a good experience, and I've talked to a lot of people like that, and I'm like, well, next event, come with us.
Mm-hmm.
We still sit at the back. I mean, you're not going to find
he's not on the rail, but like,
again, Tommy and some of the lunchbox crew pulls me up to the rail every once in a while for certain things. I mean, I've done a Linium at the rail at Ultra before, which was an experience. But for the most part, you're going to find us, that kind of half where we have room to shuffle and dance and hoop, and we're kind of with that. But we've expanded a family so incredibly much that we know people from every different section. I mean, we go to Imagine Our Home Festival, but it doesn't matter whether it's EDC or whether it's E-Force or whatever. We have people from across the country that we've met and done, and anybody can do the same if you put yourself out there.
Yeah.
So for the older people or even the younger people that are worried about getting older, you can do it as long as you want to. Yeah, I mean, I'm over 40 now. I'm 42, I guess. And I, still, I mean, most people say they wouldn't know that, and I take honor in that. But and there's plenty that are still older than I, that are still doing it. I mean, you take a look at the DJs that you're even looking up to. Cascade is my age, a little bit older. Green Velvet is, I think, 45.
Yeah.
Oakenfold's in his 60s.
I was gonna say TSO and Armin van Buren.
Yeah. Armin's, I think
he's in his.
He's in his 40s.
TSO's 50, isn't he? I'm pretty sure. Is he not?
You might have just aged him.
Did I?
He might be. We might
let's look at
that one up. But he's definitely in.
He's 52.
He's 52. Wow.
Yeah.
He took a few years.
I mean, he looks great, but he's probably got some help.
Well, not only that, he's been rodent hunting, put up wet a few times. But Gabriel and Dresden, the Boys from Above and Beyond. I mean, all these things, and I guess that leads us in the next segue of differences in DJ culture over the years. So.
Wait, can I pause on this 1 second? I want to talk about the age a little bit more because I think that section was the most valuable, and I hope people could relate to this conversation because I've been waiting to have this conversation. But you said a lot of really important things, and I think one of them, to me, that's really important is just normalizing going to raves and festivals at whatever age. And I've been very adamant about this. And I remember watching the EDC documentary Under the Electric Sky when I was 24, 25, went to my first 2 EDC Las Vegases, was completely obsessed with them. And there's a couple in the movie. So they have, a bunch of different people of all age ranges. And then there's a couple who's probably in their 30s at that point with kids who still go and rave. And I remember at the time being new to the scene, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I'll be going at that age, and thought they were so much older than me at being 24 at the time. And then now looking back at it, I'm so glad that they had them in that documentary and even now more so with everything being a little bit more mainstream, you just have no idea how old the person is next to you. And I can even say so many people I've met at the last few festivals were in their 30s or in their 40s. And I know a bunch of people who have literally written to me or who I've met who have been I just started at 31 or I just started at 32. Is that okay? Is that normal? Blah, blah, blah. I'm yep, 100%. Yep. You can start at whatever age and it's literally irrelevant, but you made such a good point about making it, it's what you put into it too, because you can go do your own thing, kind of stay to yourself, or you can just get in the crowd and meet people and nobody's asking somebody their age. And, if anything, yeah, maybe there's the group of kids who are in college, who are extremely young and who are going there to party. But for the most part, no one gives a shit and everybody is super open.
Yeah, nobody, and again, it depends on the festival too. I think your vibes, we're going to learn because I haven't been to E-Force yet either. Yeah, we're going to pop our cherry together, you and I, at E-Force. But, the Ultra, doing something at Ultra and relating and getting into the crowd is different than an EDC for sure. I would say the Ultra crowd is a little bit probably more standoffish.
Yeah, I would agree.
In that, or Coachella, or an Ultra where you have this undercurrent of bro culture, that kind of the party culture that kind of goes through. That can be very standoffish. To somebody older. But some of the best parts about being older is I have money now. Well, like when I was,
yes, retweet.
I don't know how to say this without it.
You can afford more things. You can have a better experience too.
I can, and we don't VIP it at all these festivals because I like being in GA and everything else. Now I did do Bonnaroo very, very plushy at some point in time and platinum there, but. Other than that, people look at our schedule and how many we do, and sure, part of it's for work and some of the other projects that I have in the scene and everything else. But some of it, when we go for fun, I don't work. I might network a little bit. I might meet with people and do stuff. But when I'm with Jen at a festival, we're there together and we're going to have a fun time.
Yeah.
And so, again, we did, I think I said 7, I counted, that her and I did in 2019, together, all the way from, EDC to, Ultra to we did Wakan, that year for their inaugural year. And, traveled to places that I never thought I'd go to a music festival in Arkansas to go listen to music that again was not my main type of music, but was one of the best experiences that I had in 2019. And I just on Friday finished booking our RV and rebooking our airline tickets for EDC Vegas. I'm going, whether they're holding it or not. I'm going to stand in that raceway with a Bluetooth speaker in an RV, and I'm going to do it. But and you can come join them. We'll have a little party. But you have, in my 20s, you kind of had a scrounge, and that was part of it. It was the, all right, who's paying for gas? Who's got the beer? Who's, tickets were a little bit different back then, but still, now I don't really have to worry about that stuff. If I want to go to Shambhala, I just got to figure out the logistics of doing Shambhala. Sure. Now there's other things that come up, taking time off work, PTO days that you don't worry about when, you have a job in a restaurant or, you're an Uber driver or whatever. You don't worry about, how many PTO days you have. One of the other things, bringing up kids, that all of our friends laughed at us. So they're like, how do you travel so much when you have a child in school? And we were unlucky that we don't have a good support system here. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, everything else to watch our kid while he was growing up.
Yep.
But we did, my son is my stepson, and so every other weekend, we would kind of go back and forth. So we would plan our weekends, around
when you had him.
Yeah. And sometimes we would ask, for him to be able to take an extended weekend if we needed to do like an EDC. Luckily, EDC would happen in the summer times. So or close to, it used to happen in June, but then when it even was in May, it was right at his last week of school. And so we would sit down, and I hate to admit this, and it's going to be a one of those hashtag parenting type things. We would sit with the school calendar at the beginning of the year, and we would mark out all of our festivals. And we knew that he would have 10 excused absences from school. And so we would sit down and go, okay, Ultra's here. So if he gets 2 school days here,
Yeah.
and we would work it out. What what he was in high school mainly, we would work it out to be, all right. He has, we would finish out the rest of the end of the year right at 10. And sometimes we'd have to ask friends, hey, can you watch him for a day and take him to school the next morning? So because we need to have that be a sick day.
I love it. You make it work.
Well, it got really bad. I guess Jen and I both turned to each other. Jen's going to kill me for telling this story. I might be sleeping on the couch. I think it was Wakan. Wakan went Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Okay.
And so really odd schedule for a festival. And it's all the way in Arkansas, which is not easy to get to, but really not easy if you have a kid in school. And I remember he, at that point in time, he's a freshman in high school, I think. So freshman, sophomore in high school. We had to leave for the airport at like 4:30 in the morning. And he had to get up for school, which was fine. He got himself up for school. But he went to a school that didn't have a bus system to it.
Got it. Okay.
And so we would normally have to drive him every morning. And we were like, how the hell are we going to work this out to where we're not, he has to leave at like 6 in the morning. We're not going to even be there. We're going to be boarding a plane. What do we do? We actually hired an Uber driver to go pick our son up from our house and pick him up from school and take him to school. And I think that's the point in time that Jen and I both turned to each other and said, our music festival is getting a little bit too much. when we're having a random Uber driver pick him up in the morning instead of being able to take our kid to school. But yeah, I mean, you work those things out the best that you kind of can. You're not going to be able to do everything you want to, but that's part of the price of having children.
Of course. Yeah. No, I'm listening intently here because I feel like at the end of the day, it is important because you guys are doing, like you said, what you love to do and where you're happy and you're making it work, for your family. But I think another thing that people are probably thinking who are listening is what to do when your group grows out of it, because I get questions about that all the time. Like, I'm still really into it, but I can tell all my friends are like not anymore and I don't know who to go with, or I don't know what to do. And I love that, like, either you can still do this and go by yourself and, solo raving is amazing, or you can maybe connect with people who are younger than you too, which I think is a great way to go about it. And I mean, like, I've taken it to the extreme where I know I want to do this forever. So I want to build a career in this space so that I can still attend these events and just say I'm going for work. And I think that's how it'll change for me personally.
Alrighty, you guys, I am going to leave the episode here. Thank you so much for checking out part 1. Again, part 2 will be up in 2 days, so you guys can hear us continue the conversation. Again, part 2, we are chatting about how Brandon got involved with the Lunchbox team. We're going to talk a lot about our thoughts on music festivals reopening and what we think about different measures that are going to be taken, given everything with this pandemic. And then we're also talking about people idolizing DJs and just DJ culture in general and how that's changed like throughout the years. So we still have a lot to cover. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, again, I just remind you guys, please share this to your Instagram stories, tag at raveculturecast and at Emma Capotis, and I will always share that. And I just appreciate any support. If you can write a review on iTunes, leave a couple stars, subscribe on YouTube, any of that is always appreciated. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I will be back with part 2 in just 2 days. Bye guys.